Since we have authors here, we could start as a subcommittee, and once the members come, we can form a quorum and get started. Who's first? Furtani, ACA 2. Member Furtani, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman Fong, member of the committee. It's my pleasure and honor to be able to sit here with these young people to talk about one of the most cherished things that we all hold dear relative to our democracy, and that's the ability and the right to vote. What we have before you today is ACA 2, which does not lower the age limit relative to those that vote, but will provide a change relative to those that are 17 after a primary, who then turn 18 by the time of a general election. So what happens, in fact, in practice, is they can't vote in the primary, but they can vote in the general, and ACA 2 changes that so that if they're going to be 18 by the general election and only 17 at the primary, they still can vote in the primary. All of us are elected officials that sit on the committee officially, and of course we depend on our great staff. But as elected officials, we know that more often than not, the battle in an election isn't in the general, it's in the primary. So the ability to participate fully in a primary election and in the general election, also be able to participate if they're 17 at the time of a special election, but will be 18 by the time of the general election, will franchise young people to participate in the voting process. We also know that in terms of voting, it becomes habit forming, and getting young people involved in not only voting, but working at the polls, getting them involved in campaigns, guarantees pretty much that they will become very much participants in the electoral process. So ACA 4 is a special bill that has come before this committee from years past, but what we're looking at is an ability to make sure that someone that is 17 during the time of the primary, but will be 18 during the time of the general election, current law allows them to vote in the general election, not in the primary. ACA 2 adjusts that so that if they're 17 for the primary, they can still vote if they're 18 for the general. So it won't disenfranchise them for the primary and then franchise them for the general. I have some young people here that have come along to testify, and candidly, this has been a very exciting bill to work on, working with folks that are really excited about participating in the electoral process.
Okay, witnesses in support. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Elijah Goldberg. I'm the president of the California High School Democrats and a junior at Tam High in Mill Valley, California. I'm here actually on behalf of the California Young Democrats. We're a statewide organization with 109 chapters and 12,000 members. And we're here to urge you to support ACA 2 to allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primary. I spend a lot of my time working to get students involved in the political process, and the question that I get asked more than anything else is, why should I get involved if I can't even vote? And you know, I always tell them there are plenty of other ways to get involved, but the truth of the matter is that the best way to get students involved is to give them a stake in the system, and that's what ACA 2 it gives does. It gives high school students a greater stake in the system. It will give 17-year-olds an opportunity to fulfill their civic duty at a time when they have access to the resources of both high school teachers and fellow students to help guide their decisions. And the data shows that it increases voter turnout. In Virginia in 2000, the turnout between 18 to 24-year-olds was around 56%. They then allowed 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections, and the turnout jumped from 56% to 60%. So there is a marked change between when 17-year-olds cannot participate in the full electoral system and when 17-year-olds are given the ability to fully participate. And because of that, I urge you to support ACA 2 and allow 17-year-olds to fulfill their full civic duty. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Julian Lopez. I am the student board member for the Sacramento City Unified School District, and I am here in support of this ACA2 bill. Currently, 8 states have some sort of this law already in place, and it gives students a chance, a learning opportunity, if you will, to vote. Not only is it important to know how to vote for your first real election, but you want to know how to do it when you get there. And this gives students the opportunity to learn, to adjust to the new voting, in some cases the new voting system that we have or that we adopt all the time. So this would give students that opportunity, and it would give them a voice earlier in an election when they know they'll be there in the real election coming in when it comes. So I urge you to support this and pass it, and let's get started, and let's be the 9th state to join this group. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
My name is Monica Cordero. I'm 16 years old, and I'm here to support ACA2. This bill is very important to me because it allows 18-year-old adults the opportunity to participate in the full scope of the electoral process. I will be 18 in October of next year, and I will not be able to vote in the gubernatorial primary, only the general election.
Hello, my name is Kavikant Lal. I'm 18 years old, and I'm here to support ACA2. This bill is very important because it allows 18-year-old adults to participate in the full scope of the electoral process.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Gabe Bine, and I'm 18 years old, and I'm here to support ACA2. This bill is very important to me because it allows 18-year-old adults like me to the opportunity to participate in the full scope of the electoral process. Last year I voted in the general election, but unfortunately I was denied the right to vote in the primary election because I did not turn 18 until October, 1 month before the general election.
Great. Okay, before I ask for witnesses in opposition, we have a quorum in here, so can the secretary take roll?
Fong,
Here.
Nilo, Bill Berryhill, Koto, Mendoza, Saldana, Swanson.
Okay, we have a quorum. The meeting is called to order. There are 2 housekeeping announcements. First, Assemblymember Niolo has been appointed to replace Assemblymember Adams on the committee in today's hearing only. Second item is number 3, ACA 5, and number 7, ACA 21, have been pulled from today's hearings. Okay, is there any witnesses in opposition to this bill? Hearing none. Any questions from Assembly members? Assemblymember Niolo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to be back here, if only for this meeting. I was on this committee for a couple of years, and we hear a lot of very interesting proposals here, and they're always thought-provoking to discuss, which this one also is indeed. I have not supported proposals similar to this in the past, and I cannot support this today. But especially since young, interested and engaged folks are here to testify, I think I should explain. I think that they are probably the exception, but a couple of points I think is very important, or one overriding point is important. I've said repeatedly that I'm not interested in increasing voter turnout merely for the sake of increasing voter turnout. What I am interested in is increasing the turnout of voters who are knowledgeable and engaged. And as I said, I am convinced that all 5 of you are, but I am unconvinced that just merely registering people to vote will necessarily prepare them to vote. In the committee analysis under the arguments of support, which I presume that the authors submitted, that young voters have traditionally voted at the lowest rates because they are not prepared for participation. Registration doesn't prepare. education as well as one's own volition prepares. Unfortunately, we have reduced significantly civics education in high school. That's not your fault. That's the fault of a lot of other people, but it is, I think, a problem. And it also talks about expanding the vote rights of 17-year-olds, increases their participation, but what it doesn't address is what happens after that. Is the voter participation consistently, significantly higher in other states that allowed this after the initial experience? I'm not aware of any evidence of that. And with regard to the testimony, if we do accept the notion that the earlier opportunity encourages participation, then why not 16 or 15? At any point where we have achieved the age of reason, under the logic of the bill, it would improve our process if we were to lower the voting age to whatever age we believe is the legitimate and appropriate age of reason. And the notion of the opportunity to learn in the first election still exists in the first election. And by the way, all of us have to learn when there's new voting techniques when we do that for the first time. So the bill doesn't address what I believe is a larger issue relative to voting in a democratic society, and that is to maximize the number of people to go to the polls because they know all of the issues, they want to participate in all of those issues, they are engaged and informed voters.
Assemblymember Berryhill.
Yeah. First of all, great job coming up here, and obviously you kids are all very mature kids, and I congratulate you on the effort you've put forward. We had a similar bill to this, and I spoke to this as a father of a 13-year-old, 16-year-old, and 17-year-old. And I spoke to this on the floor of the Assembly. It was to pre-register at 16 and 17. And so, and not to actually vote, though, at those ages. But with that, my opinion is that you kids grow up too fast. You've got a whole life of responsibility ahead of you. It's great that those who choose to be engaged and be involved through campaigns and so forth, like I'm sure probably all of you are. I was at your age. I didn't have to have a vote. I just wanted to be part of the process. But when you're 17, you should be thinking, I mean, most kids should be focused on their education, on their finals, their exams. You got so many things that you have to deal with to throw registering you at 17 and then to go to my colleague Mr. Nilo's comments on it doesn't guarantee that, I mean, as you learn the process, we all learn the process, and so we all go through that. And I just don't think laying that on 17-year-olds is something that we should be doing. And as well, I don't know, I have a real hard time with kids growing up too fast. Maybe that's just because I'm a dad with kids that have grown up too fast and are about ready to be gone. But I just can't support this. I think 18 is a reasonable age, and the reason we did 18 was because they went and fought for our country at that age. And they still do. So if you're going to give them that responsibility, then you give them the responsibility to vote as well. Before that, it was 21. But the argument was made that if they're going to fight and die for this country, therefore they ought to be able to vote. And so I totally get that, but to go 17 it doesn't make sense, and I can't support this. I'm sorry, guys, but good job coming up here today.
Assemblymember Saldana.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm curious, how many of you work part-time? Any of you have part-time jobs? Okay, and as you think about it, okay. So you're paying taxes. You're taxpayers now. When you get your paycheck at the end of the week, you see what's being taken out. You don't get as much as you thought. And you're licensed drivers? How many of you are licensed drivers? Okay, so you're pretty responsible. You have to go through the process to be licensed. And And any of you in ROTC or considering maybe joining the military at some point? ROTC? Well, thank you very much for that. And, I think you are taking on a lot of responsibility at this age. And, as much as we would like to have young people not take on work, military service, other responsibilities, the fact is that many families require that at younger and younger ages, that you contribute to your family's income, that you plan for your future at a younger and younger age. And so I think the idea that, and the fact is you can go and join the military and serve at 17, correct? You're allowed, and we probably have active duty military right now that are overseas at the age of 17. So I understand the concerns are being expressed by my colleagues, but I just know that life as teenagers these days is not, you've taken on a lot of the responsibilities and obligations of adulthood, and yet you can't vote for the people that represent you and people like myself that cast votes that impact your lives on a daily basis. And I think that your willingness to take that on and be informed voters is admirable. And so I'd like to go ahead and move this bill and encourage you to keep working at it. And if your concerns, Mr. Nilo, are that they are not going to be informed, then I think that's not a reason to oppose it at this point. I think it can be amended. It could include good preparatory classes and programs to make sure that, I think everyone, regardless of age, should take a more active interest in being informed on the issues. But I think the fact that you are here, you're involved, you're working, you're paying taxes, you're serving in military or you're preparing to serve in the military, that's an indication of the lives of a lot of teenagers these days. And the reality is that there are many obligations and responsibilities you're taking on freely without even being able to vote on many of the things that will affect you in your lives. So thank you for that, and very happy to move this bill. Okay,
it's been moved and seconded. Anyone else? Any comments, Sandra? Swanson?
No, I think that was all said.
Okay.
If I could respond, Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
Specifically, we are not talking about 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. We're not even talking about 17-year-olds, all of them. We are very specific in this bill. A young person that is 17 during the time of the primary but will be 18 by the time of the general can vote in the general election by current law. What ACA 2 does is merely change it that if they're going to be 18 by the general, although 17 during the primary, they can participate in the full process of that election so they can vote in the primary. It's not about anybody coming of the age of reason. It's not about 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. It's very narrow and very specific. The other thing, and I agree with you, Mr. Nilo, that I wish there could be a test for those participating in the elections as voters, that they be prepared, but there's no such test. And also, in terms of looking at participating, there's this natural selection process of the individual, because you have to register. No one registers you. You have to volunteer to register. So the people that would come and participate and be franchised by this particular bill would be those that are interested, those that want to do it because they would have to take the initiative to participate, and then would be treated like every other voter, which is whether you're prepared, fully prepared, not prepared, whatever the case may be. That is not a test that you have to pass in order to vote. So this is a very narrow bill, very specific bill. It franchises these individuals that by 18 years old, they can vote in the general, but if they're 17 during the primary, they can't under current law. This would change it so they could participate in the full process of the primary and the general. And as we said earlier, so much of the election takes place in the primary these days that the general election sometimes is anticlimactic, and this really gets them activated. The kind of excitement in the primary, who's your candidate, etc. And you couldn't have seen this more aptly than we saw in the general election in the last November presidential, where the primaries on both sides of the aisle were very exciting, involved a lot of different people, involved a ton of different ideas, and I think that's what we want.
Well, I agree with you. I think this is a great idea to franchise the young people in the primary to participate in the general election. And I hope that the state of California starts moving in that direction to franchise 17-year-olds to vote in these elections as well. And so, I support this measure, and I'd like to be a co-author of it as well.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Secretary, please call the roll.
Fong,
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo? Nilo, no. Bill Berryhill? Bill Berryhill, no. Koto? Mendoza? Saldana? Saldana, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
Okay, it's on call. Need another vote.
Chairman, I have to testify in the Senate. I'll be back.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Thank you.
Okay. Before you leave, can we do the consent calendar?
Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Move. The consent calendars are two bills. Bill number 11, SB 740 by Cedillo, and number 12, bill number SB 817. It's a Senate Elections Committee bill.
As amended.
As amended, with the technical amendments outlined in comment number 3 of the analysis.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay. Please call roll.
Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo? Aye. Nilo, aye. Bill Berryhill?
Aye.
Bill Berryhill, aye. Koto? Mendoza? Saldana? Saldana, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
Thank you. Okay. Consent calendar is approved.
Next is Senator Hancock. Item 10.
Senator Hancock, item 10, SB 387.
Thank you, and I would like to thank Assemblyman Hernandez for graciously letting me come first, even though his bill is first on file, I think. He signed up, whatever it was. Anyway, thank you, Ed.
Senatorial preference.
Right, right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Senate Bill 387 is really a common sense measure that would end the practice of rejecting ballots if voters make an extraneous mark on the ballot of some sort or inadvertently write their name on the ballot. This is typically done when people are testing the ink and the ballpoint pen to see if it works. This would provide that the extraneous markings would not render the ballot void, and a ballot that had any personal information, which sometimes happens with absentee ballots or whatnot, would be remade in the same way as damaged ballots are remade. Yeah, in this day of automated tabulation, there's no need for the reason this law was originally established, which had to do with vote buying when ballots were hand tabulated.
I move the bill.
Been moved and seconded. Bill.
With me is the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Nicole Becker on behalf of the Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen. We are pleased to be the sponsors of this measure. The Senator eloquently laid out the bill, and we just ask for your support on this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any witnesses in opposition? None? Any questions from Assembly members? Nilo? Member Nilo?
I understand the point about the automatic tabulation under the way that we're voting currently in Sacramento County anyway. We feed our own ballot in. I don't know that that's the case in every county necessarily. But I do know that absentee ballots have to be handled manually. So I'm sure that the problem of buying votes doesn't exist anymore, and perhaps we think we don't need safeguards for it, at least insofar as using this technique is concerned, because of the fact that the ballots are tossed out if they have such markings on them. So it's kind of reminds me of the story of the guy that's walking around downtown San Francisco with a funny-looking weapon, and somebody asks him what that's for. He says, "Well, it's a weapon to keep elephants away." And they said, "Well, there's no elephants in San Francisco." That's a double entendre. and the guy says, "We'll see how well it works." But the fact of the matter is, I'm sure that the law has virtually eliminated this sort of practice because the ballots are thrown away. If the law is eliminated, then it's possible that the practice could come back, and the place where it could come back is if there aren't the automatic tabulations. I mean, I don't know what kind of voting systems we're going to continue to have. We've had, since 2000, we've had different systems in different counties as we search for the best, which probably was the one that we had before the year 2000, but I digress. However, absentee ballots are an increasing proportion of the vote, and probably will be a majority of votes sometime soon. And I have to believe that the possibility could still exist. And so I think it's dangerous to completely eliminate the safeguards for that.
Assemblymember Berryhill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can't you, if you make a mistake on your ballot, you can ask for a new ballot, correct? I just want to clarify that. I've never had to do that, but you can. They will give you a new ballot in the process if you were to screw up and make some marks on it. So, yeah, I would agree with my colleague, and I just think this opens up for too much potential fraud, so I won't be able to support it.
Okay. Member Saldana.
Thank you. Relative to that, though, wouldn't it be possible people don't understand that a mark may disqualify their ballot and they don't ask for one because it's seen as inconsequential or so small that it's not worth requesting one? So I think the problem is that people aren't requesting. You're correct that they can request up to two, I think, 2 times, but they may not appreciate that they need to do that if their mark is something.
Right, particularly because I think, according to the Secretary of State, most of these things are doodles to make sure the pen works, and they may and probably don't simply realize.
Does it interfere with the scanner? Is that what's happening?
Sometimes it does, yes.
But it's not near the circle, and so the voter may not recognize that it will cause that problem with tabulation.
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of like when someone's signing a check and, they make a mistake and they'll initial it or they'll put an arrow and the voter just doesn't realize that, just those extra markings that are outside
will disqualify.
Correct. That's correct.
And so what happens if it is disqualified and the voter has already left the voting area? Then there's no way of contacting that person because it's a secret ballot. So they're effectively disenfranchised through no one's intent or error. It's just that they didn't recognize that mark would be interpreted as a violation.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Now, with the absentee ballots, if you really wanted to do this, I mean, the address is written on the outside of the envelope. And what the measure calls for is sequestering the ballots and remaking the ballot, which is what we do now with damaged ballots that could be bent or made incapable of going through the scanner in other ways. So in other words, now you would see it wouldn't, if it didn't go through the scanner, you would remake the ballot and the ballot would be counted. The election officials would do that.
Senator Swanson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just think that the benefit always has to go to protecting the franchise, the voters' right to vote and to cast a ballot and for it to be counted. And I think this law goes specifically to giving that benefit of the doubt and allowing for a process that recognizes the importance of that right.
Okay, thank you. Well, do you have an estimate of how many ballots are invalidated because of markings in a given election?
We have had some conversations with the counties, and overall, it's a small percentage of the ballots that are rejected due to stray markings. However, we do think that, the voter went to cast their ballot and would like to ensure that, the ballot is counted, as the voter intent is clear.
Well, thank you. Okay, I like this bill. I like it. So,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So I'm going to ask for support of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. You know, in my close, I simply would say we are trying to make sure that every voter that makes the effort to go to the polls, whether it's an absentee voter or a voter in person, does have a chance to have their vote counted, and would ask for your aye vote.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll.
Fong,
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo? Nilo, no. Bill Berryhill?
No.
Bill Berryhill, no. Koto?
Koto, aye.
Koto, aye. Mendoza? Saldana? Saldana, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
4-2, it's out.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Assemblymember Hernandez. Number 4, ACA 13, first. You have two bills, right? ACA
Yes,
13.
sir. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of both of my constitutional amendments. The first one that I'll present will be ACA 13, and the second one will be ACA 14. I will be taking the amendments put forth by the committee. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members, we have a very, very unique direct form of democracy here in the state of California. And I'm not here to advocate, believe me, I am not here to advocate that we get rid of that system. I believe that we should have a form of direct democracy. However, you know, I've kind of mulled over the last year and a half, 2.5 years since I've been in the legislature about how little we have making some significant changes and fundamental changes of how this government works or how California government works. I believe that we have a flawed initiative system. But as I mentioned, I don't think we should, you know, eliminate it, but I think we need to reform it. And the reason why I say that, if you look at all the initiatives that have been brought forth, there have been quite a few that have been found either unconstitutional. Obviously, the voters reject a significant number of them. But the bottom line is, I believe there's a lot of initiatives that are brought forward that are just written poorly. It's bad legislation. What I'm proposing to do is that we still have the form where we get individuals, they gather signatures. The proponents of the measure will bring it to the Secretary of State. And once that occurs, then the Secretary of State will then take it to the legislature. It'll be given to the appropriate committee, and that does several things. Number one, it allows the legislative body to interject its views. But most important, I believe it allows the public to have a forum and have a debate and a discussion about some potential changes and impacts that occur and how it affects them. Whereas currently the initiative process doesn't allow that. It also allows a variety of resources, whether it's the LAO, which is nonpartisan, but I also believe Ledge Council, which can steer and perhaps write the legislation such that it is constitutional or found to be appropriate so that it won't get rejected, but also allow the legislature to weigh in. Several things can occur. Number one, if amendments or if the legislature agrees, then it goes direct to the people for a vote. Unless it's a statute, then it goes to the governor. The second thing that will occur, that in the event that the legislature puts forth an amendment that the makers of the proposition feel and agree with, then it still goes to the people. In the event that the legislature makes an amendment that is not supported by the makers of the proposition, the individuals still have the ability to move that to the people, but at a higher vote threshold, at a higher threshold of signature gathering. By doing that, it allows them to still have direct democracy. But I believe that this is something that needs to be changed, because I believe that a lot of the reason why we're in the trouble we are in financially right now is because we put forth too many initiatives, and we need to have them looked at in the light of day. So I respectfully ask for your aye vote, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any witnesses in support?
You're in oppose.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
My name is Bob Stern. I'm president of the Center for Governmental Studies. We're based in Los Angeles, and we've written this book, Democracy by Initiative. I've given you a summary. I haven't given you the full book. And this is our second edition. We came out with a book in 1992 as well. I'm also a past committee consultant of this committee. I worked as a consultant for Henry Waxman when he was chairman of this committee for 2 years, and have testified before this committee a number of times when I lived in Sacramento, as well as now that I'm in Los Angeles. I was also a member of the Speaker's Commission on Initiatives, Bob Hertzberg's commission, which met in 2000-2001. And I've drafted and I have worked on several initiatives, some successful and some not successful. We're not taking a position on ACA 13 because there are parts of the measure that we think are very good, and then there's one part that we don't agree with. But I've had long talks with the author and with his staff, and they've been very helpful and receptive. And if the measure moves along, I'm sure we'll continue the talks. On Sunday of this week, I was quoted in the Kansas City Star newspaper in an article discussing the initiative process, and I said, I think the legislative process at its best is far superior to the initiative process. And we have offered a number of recommendations to improve the initiative process. We've commissioned polls of voters. We've held focus group meetings to determine how voters feel about various initiative reforms. And the result is this. Voters want fewer initiatives, they want better drafted initiatives, and they want more information about the measures on the ballot. But unfortunately, our polls show that the voters have more confidence in the initiative process than they do in the legislative process. Now, this bill accomplishes some of the goals that we think are very important, but contains one provision that I think the voters would reject. Let's talk about the good parts of the bill. The bill requires that any initiative that qualifies for the ballot to first go to the legislature to see if the legislature and the proponents can work out a compromise and take the initiative off the ballot. Based on my experience of studying this, I think this provision would result probably in a reduction of initiatives by about 15 to 20%. So there'd be a significant number of fewer initiatives. Now, the classic case of why this is necessary occurred in February 2008. Where the voters were forced to vote on a measure, Prop 91, which had already been settled by the proponents and the legislature in compromise legislation. Because the proponents, by mistake, had turned in too many signatures, the initiative went on the ballot anyway, even though you worked out a deal with the proponents. And the proponents in the ballot pamphlet, I brought the ballot pamphlet along with me, actually urged voters to vote no. It's the first time I've ever seen supporters urging people to vote no. Fortunately, the voters did vote no, but 40% of the voters voted yes. And so, obviously, there was a problem of getting information out that the proponents were saying vote no. Now, the part that has the problem is that if the proponent and the legislature can't agree on a compromise and the legislature holds on to the measure, then the proponents have to go back to the voters and get 100% more signatures, thus probably delaying the initiative from going on the ballot for at least 18 months and clearly doubling the cost of circulation. Even if the proponents wanted the legislature to pass legislation, if the legislature refuses to consider the measure, the proponents have to get more signatures. And I'm familiar with at least 2 cases where the proponents were begging the legislature, please pass this initiative so we don't have to go on the ballot. And the legislature did not pass the initiative, so it had to go on the ballot. In both cases, by the way, the people approved the initiative. So if this measure would go into effect, the proponents actually would be penalized for legislative inaction. Now, in discussion with the author and the staff, the question has become, what incentive does the initiative proponent have to work out a deal with the legislature? And I have come up with 2 incentives. First, there is a guarantee that their measure or a similar measure will be enacted. Our statistics show that only 31% of initiatives pass this decade. So there's a 70% chance if your initiative gets on the ballot, it's not going to be enacted. If the legislature and the proponent can work out a deal, it's a 100% chance that the measure is enacted. That's a great incentive to the proponent. Secondly, if the legislature and the proponents work out a compromise, the proponents won't have to raise the $5 to $10 million that they'll need to pass the measure on the ballot. So I think these are 2 major incentives for the proponent to keep the initiative off the ballot, to work out a deal with the legislature. Unfortunately, there is no incentive for the legislature, though, to keep it off the ballot. So we have a series of recommendations in our book that I hope will be considered by the legislature. The first one that Assemblyman Hernandez has is certainly one of the most important, and that's clearly important. I hope we can continue to work with you and the author to ensure that our initiative process is brought into the 21st century. After all, we have a 100-year anniversary coming up in 1911, where the initiative process will be 100 years old, and we really haven't changed it very much, and we do need to change it, we agree, and we need to change it in very constructive ways. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could get some reaction from Dr. Hernandez on the notion of going back to the voters and getting another 100% worth of signatures. What reaction would you have to that?
Yes, and we have had the ability to speak on the phone quite a bit. He was very gracious to come up and meet with my staff, and I made a commitment that I'd like to continue to work with us, but I need to be assured that there's got to be some safeguards so that in the flip side that the proponents won't just ignore the legislature completely and put it directly on the ballot. So there needs to be kind of some checks and balances. I understand that, you know, I believe there needs to be some fundamental change. And I'm not claiming that this is the answer to all the questions, but I'd like to at least have the debate and the discussion. And if I see significant concern, then obviously I will take that in consideration. And by all means, I will continue to take into consideration what he said. And I'm not proposing it, but I'm maybe even thinking of, instead of 5% for a statute and 8% for a constitutional amendment, instead of doubling it, maybe making it 4% and then 8% and then, you know, changing the dynamics so it's not overwhelmingly, you know, difficult to get to that second step, or increase it by a slighter amount. But currently right now I'd like to just have this discussion and move it as it is, and then maybe look at some potential amendments at a later date.
Okay. Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair, members, Jay Hansen with the State Building Construction Trades Council. We've been involved in a lot of reform efforts in the last couple of years. The State Building Trades has joined an organization, California Forward. It's a bipartisan organization that's looking to better government and better representation. It's a group that's business, labor, community groups. And this, you know, we're looking at different proposals all the time. And we thought this was right in line with some of the things that we've been working on. We believe that this allows the will of the people to be furthered. You know, our organization is very involved in the initiative process, and oftentimes we find that it's just expensive, wasteful, and damaging to a functional democracy. I agree that the best legislation, the best way to pass laws is through the legislature. That's how you're going to get the best process. You go through a long committee process. You've got all the checks and balances. And when you can't have that process, when an initiative is required, allowing the proponents to better the intent of the language is really the right thing to do. Too many times we see, if the court overturns an initiative that's passed, what do? You have voter disgust, you have more continued disgust with government, you have people angry, you have people that think the system's broken. It's damaging to democracy. It's damaging to our government. It's damaging to all of us that are involved. We think this is a measure that moves. The proponents of an initiative can have the opportunity to work with the legislature and pass something that's a good piece of legislation. Involve the legislature in the process. That's the appropriate way to do it. And if not, the process can still move forward. But hopefully people can be brought together and it still preserves the intent of what the initiatives were for. We think this is something that just makes for better government, and I think, all the people would be better served. So urge support, please.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition to this bill.
You can speak twice.
Mr. Chairman and members, David Wolf here with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And Mr. Chairman, given that we're opposed to 3 measures on the calendar today, would you object if I made just a brief 30-second statement on the cumulative proposals in exchange for shorter testimony on the actual bills?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Members, we've opposed 3 measures in this committee today. And all these measures deal with the fundamental question of how much control should the people have over their own government. We are broadly opposed to any measure that would strip away people's ability to vote on ballot measures important to them, thereby tipping the balance of power back toward the legislature. The initiative is important in the checks and balance process that holds this legislature accountable to voters, a process most recently witnessed in the May 19th special election. Lastly, it does bear mentioning that HGATA would not exist without the initiative, which, of course, in our view, is a great reason to support the process. On the bill in chief, and this is ACA 13, correct? Yeah. On the bill in chief, I mean, we just simply believe that doubling the signature requirements would inhibit voter choice and inhibit democracy and make it more difficult to qualify measures for the ballot. So for that reason, we'd ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Virginia Handley with PAWPAC, and I'm sorry, I just learned about this bill a couple of days ago. I do try to follow all of the animal bills, and then when I found out about this, I've participated in a number of initiatives concerning animals, all of which have been very successful. And I can see that this ACA 13 could have a detrimental effect, and this having to possibly have double the number of signatures, and having the legislature having the ability to amend the initiative. One of the initiatives I participated in, Prop 4 years ago, was about limiting the kinds of predator control traps. And we did have a hearing. The Senate Natural Resources and Wildlife Committee had what you would call an oversight hearing. They didn't have a vote particularly of changing the initiative, but it was an opportunity to have a public hearing and having proponents and opponents state their case, which is, I think, what Dr. Hernandez would like to do is that these initiatives can have more public hearings, and we support that. But I believe they could have these types of hearings now. Also, there's nothing preventing the legislature from putting in a bill on their own, and that could handle the same situation as the initiative does, and offer an alternative to the initiative. We recently passed Prop 2. It was 63% of the voters. We've tried through the legislature a number of times to get some reforms in, and they're unsuccessful. And I believe it was said that the public does trust initiatives, and we trust the public more and more that they support animal welfare. And if we can't get it done in the legislature, then it's right that we go to the people. Thank you.
Okay. Any other witnesses in opposition? None? Assembly members? Roger Niello. Assemblymember Niello.
Dr. Hernandez, I appreciate you bringing Mr. Stern here, because he did a very good job of speaking to both the positive and the negative sides of your initiative, and I find his comments of concern to be far more compelling than those of support. First of all, it's interesting to me, the title of this document, Democracy by Initiative, since we're dealing with California, and we are otherwise a representative democracy, not a pure democracy. The initiative process is the only real democracy in California. And I don't say that to criticize the legislative process, because I am a believer in representative democracy. I think it works much better than pure democracy. And I have significant concerns about the initiative process. But the title of this document really is kind of like murder by death. I mean, the initiative process is the democracy that we have. It's the only real democracy that we have. And but with regard to your points, and my concern about the proposition, as I said, I am a believer and an absolute proponent of representative democracy, and I agree that the legislative process is far superior in concept for these issues than the legislative process, but you also pointed out that unfortunately the voters have more confidence in the initiative process than they do the legislative process, and on that I would point out that we are running a very big risk in confidence of voters if we're going to do something that is going to indicate that we're violating that greater confidence that they have in the legislative process. But the fact of the matter is the whole thing started because the legislature refused to address issues that were very important to the voters and important to the health of the whole state way back when it was initially introduced because of the disproportionate influence of the business interests in the state, primarily the large railroads. And ever since, and particularly in the resurgence of the initiative process in the last couple of decades, it has been exactly because there are issues that the legislature will not pass that the voters end up supporting. Now, that being the case, to bring the initiative back to the legislature will just ensure that that initiative will be either killed or considerably set back because of the higher threshold of moving forward if the legislature doesn't do anything with it. And in fact, the committee analysis states that pitfalls exist with the initiative direct initiative process. However, it states in the analysis legislators rarely take up the initiative proposal, and when they do, they almost always reject it. I submit that that is exactly what would happen in this case. Again, confidence of the voters would be put at risk. I would also point out that the fact that only about 30% of the initiatives have passed in the last decade probably speaks to the issue that initiatives are not really easy to pass in the first place. In fact, initiatives are far easier to defeat than they are to pass. It's much easier to create confusion than it is to sell the initiative. So in all, that may be, in the final analysis, the best guard toward the concerns that we have about it. But this would be a mistake, number one, from a policy perspective, because it is the only direct democracy. But secondly, I think we would be really taking a risk as to the confidence of the voters to proactively for the legislature to attempt to take away from them not just the direct democracy initiative, but because of the need for it in the first place, take away the issues.
Member Cotto?
You know, I want to thank you, Mr. Stern, for your testimony. That was very, very helpful, and thank you for providing us this materials. It's probably a little easier to handle this one than that. Although that looks like
this?
Yeah, get me one. All right, that would be very good. But thank you for your comment. I get the impression from listening to the both the presentations, that this is not a done deal. That this is something that this is an important issue that needs to be looked at. Right? That you're not proposing a finished product here, but rather you're identifying the initiative process as a system that has not worked as well as it could for the state of California, right? And I think we know all of the different reasons. So I think that this legislation is worth us pursuing and evaluating and looking. And I would hope that you would continue to meet with Mr. Stern and with other proponents or opponents of this, so that we might be able to get to a point where the legislative process the initiative process would work more effectively for us so that citizens do have the ability to petition their government in a way that makes sense, but again, doing it in a way that answers some of the concerns that you've put together in this bill. So for those reasons, Mr. Chair, I think that this is worth pursuing, and I move the bill.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other comments from Assembly members? Assembly member Saldana?
I'm curious if I am also concerned about the doubling. It would be seen as a punitive, potentially punitive outcome by if you go through the process in good faith. and you don't resolve your differences, then you have to go back and essentially start over again on the signature process. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm still inclined to support this because I know it's not a finished product and that you are open to looking at some potential changes. And I've actually, as I think we've discussed, I've been meeting with constitutional law students and professors in San Diego about the fact that so many of our ballot measures have been challenged in court, that when that happens, the state has to defend against those. There's a cost to the state when there's a constitutional question. I mean, there are clearly problems, and I know that you've done a very good analysis of many of those problems. Is there any way to turn this into a perceived benefit? And I know you mentioned that the way you see it, there's 100% certainty of passage. I don't quite understand how you came up with that. You said that normally with the initiative process that only 30% of the initiatives pass, but that you believed that somehow by going through this process, 100% if they succeed in resolving any...
I probably misspoke. What I meant was if the proponents in the legislature work something out and the legislature passes the bill, that's 100%.
Well, and it needs to be signed as well. So that's assuming that
exactly.
we have the governor.
If it's not signed, then it would go on the ballot. Mm-hmm. But if it is
without the additional signatures. So
right. In other words, you come to the legislature. The legislature says, "Let's work out a deal." You work out a deal. And the governor signs it. That's 100% assurance. You get your initiative enacted into law.
Although, and in the case of a veto.
Well, if it's veto, then obviously we're talking about statutory, of course, not constitutional. Constitutional still would have to go on the ballot, constitutional amendments. But statutory, there could be statutory initiatives. The one I was thinking of, where if the legislature had passed one more bill, the initiative would have been taken off the ballot, and the bill would have gone into effect.
And it would have negated the legislature's action. And that one that you referenced, that they put it on there after, or it was on the ballot, it failed, but had it passed, then we would have had competing. It
would have negated what the legislature and the proponents had worked out. That was a constitutional amendment, however. The voters had to approve it. What I was talking about for a statutory change, if the legislature and the proponents can work out an agreement on a statutory measure, and the governor signs it, the bill goes into effect, the proponents are then guaranteed 100% certainty that their measure, at least as amended, has gone into effect, as opposed to 30%.
That's the potential benefit of entering into this process.
That's
that you
one
think
benefit.
Will outweigh the perceived detriment, which is 100% more votes that are required. I'm just trying to get a sense of how people might view this. Is this hampering their participation or hindering their participation?
I'm against the second part, the 100% more signatures.
You oppose that?
I oppose that part, but the first part I strongly support, and I think it would be enhanced. Not only the initiative process, it would enhance the legislative process and would show the public that the legislature is working to try to solve some problems. Now, as I say, I don't anticipate that this is going to happen in 100% of the time. I think my guess is between 15 and 20% of the initiatives would be approved by the legislature. So we're not talking about all the initiatives being taken off the ballot, but a significant number. And that's what the public wants to see, is that you're working to reduce the number of initiatives on the ballot, and that's what you'd be doing.
And this would require that every initiative go through this. It's not an opt-in as we've had in the past with indirect versus direct. So, I've long argued that if people had to check off a little box saying, with their Social Security number, saying, I will pay for whatever the costs are of this initiative, that we probably would have far fewer people signing on, because we do need more analysis and we do need a more genuine assessment of what the impacts will be. And I think looking at for what we are spending now on prisons, for example, going from $2 billion a year to $10 billion now is very closely linked to some of the initiatives that have increased sentencing and penalties. And voters are told often that there will be no additional cost. What they aren't told is that's because we are shifting funds from other programs in the general fund to cover the costs of that. So I think any additional review to have a more informed voter population is a good thing to aim for. So I want to support this and have it continue on its way. I don't think it's fully where it needs to be with some of these issues, but it's certainly something that we need to look at as the cost of doing business in California is escalating in areas like prisons and decreasing in areas like education. So that's why I'm willing to move this and help it go forward.
Just a comment, side comment, the Blakesley bill that'll be coming up a little later, I think, begins to get towards the point that you were talking about, a checkoff in terms of being able to pay for these initiatives. But, Mr. Chairman, I forgot to say that as amended, that I moved the bill as amended, and I would just only add that Mr. Hernandez, Dr. Assemblymember Hernandez, that you look at that 100% issue that
I definitely will.
She mentioned.
Okay, I had a question for you, Ed. If the proponents disagree with the legislators' changes, they would be able to move forward with the initiative proposal without those changes?
Yes.
Okay, that's the amendment. Well, you know, I see there's still a lot of work in this bill, and I know that you're going to continue to work on it, and I'm going to recommend a support for this.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Secretary, call roll.
Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo? No. Nilo? No. Bill Berryhill? No. Bill Berryhill? No. Koto?
Koto, aye.
Koto, aye. Mendoza? Saldana? Saldana, aye. Swanson?
It'll be on call.
Thank you.
Okay, ACA 14, Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members again. The debate that we just had is exactly what I wanted, to actually shed some light on our initiative process, you know, albeit, and I admit it, that there still needs to be some work, and I'm going to continue to work with all the members here in the committee as well as my colleagues across the aisle. But I brought forth another constitutional amendment, ACA 14.
Next.
What I'd like to propose is that it be held in this committee. I understand that the chair has made a none recommendation, but I'd still like to have the discussion and the debate and allow me the opportunity to either work with your staff to see how we can either move it along or make some potential changes. You heard Mr. Stern earlier talked about what voters wanted, and when they did the polling, they found that voters just wanted fewer initiatives. And if you look at the number of initiatives that have been proposed, you know, for example, since 1912 to 2002, it's been a total of 1,187 initiatives for circulation. As you know, I believe we need to have them looked at, but what ACA 14 does, it just limits the amount of initiatives that are going to be put on the ballot every election cycle. And let's say you don't make quite the queue, then the next election cycle, then that one will get type priority. So I'd like to just open up for discussion at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair, members, Jay Hansen with the State Building Trades Council. And again, you know, we're very interested in these kind of measures. On this one in particular, I know that every election cycle, when there's 5, 10, 20 initiatives that are on the ballot, it's overwhelming, it's expensive. I don't know any citizen out there who wants to see that many initiatives in front of them when there are multiple pages. And of course, I truly respect the esteemed Mr. Niello, and however, I was a bit surprised when we're talking about initiatives of the only real democracy. I know that there's, you know, leaving democracy in the hands of multimillionaires or moneyed special interests, even like my own, you know, might please some people. The fact is that the average citizen, I think, would be appalled that the folks who put initiatives on the ballot can do so at a very low cost. $1 or $2 million, you can put an initiative on the ballot. And that's really all it is anymore. It's a function of money. It's not a function of democracy. When we had an initiative that was a solar power initiative that was written and proposed by a person who was standing to make tens and tens of millions of dollars, and he only had to invest a small amount of money, hey, that was a money maker. The people that I know that were involved in some of the stem cell research, you know, as good as that is, you know, a lot of people made a lot of money off that. That's not what the initiative process was supposed to be about. And I think that limiting the amount of initiatives that are on the ballot would be a healthy thing. It would give people an opportunity to look at the initiative process, and I think we could look at, you know, what, you know, get back into what the initiative process was meant to be, a check and balance on the legislature, and also an opportunity for reals, you know, for the citizenry to come forward, and not for folks with just a couple $1,000,000 in their pocket to run these ballot initiatives. I know our organization spends a lot of money fighting, supporting. To me, it's a waste of money. I think that we'd be better served using our resources someplace else, and I think that most organizations would prefer to do that, and I think most voters would rather have a more thoughtful process and have an ability to really get into depth on initiatives, and I think this would be a step in the right direction. So Building Trades is in support of this measure, and hope that you would also support.
Thank you. Any witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, David Wolf here with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And we just believe strongly that ACA 14 does in fact limit democracy and curtails freedom of speech by limiting the number of initiatives to 5. Polls from numerous organizations, as has already been alluded to, polls from the PPIC, for instance, do indicate overwhelming support for the initiative process. And we just believe to limit the number of initiatives to 5 does seem somewhat punitive. And by forcing groups like ours to recollect the signatures in the event we're number 6 instead of number 5 in the ballot process, it really does curtail nonprofit good government groups like ours. When you figure to qualify a constitutional initiative does take around $2 million, we may not have the money to come back in the next election and requalify an initiative. And just when you consider, what we've done over the past 30 years, including Propositions 13 and 218, which have saved taxpayers over $500 billion in 30 years, these initiatives might not have even come into being had this ACA been in place. So for these reasons, we oppose that. Thank you.
Okay.
Virginia Handley, PAWPAC. I'd like to echo the concerns of the Howard Jarvis organization. We have the same concerns of limiting it to 5 is certainly not fair to number 6 or number 7, and then requiring them to have to go out and get the signatures again. We mentioned it's over $1 million to get on the ballot, and that's nothing for those who just go out and buy it. But for grassroots organizations, many of which these initiatives come from, that's an awful lot of money, and it's very unfair to send those groups out back on the streets again. Also, concerning the ballot, there's so much that's already on the ballot that I don't think that this would make much of a difference as far as the crowding of a ballot or making a ballot less confusing. So I don't see how this helps at all.
Mr. Chair, just for a point of clarification, because I believe the opponents of the measure from the Howard Jarvis as well as the PAWPAC, I don't think quite understand the measure. It doesn't state that if you are number 6 that you have to re-get new signatures. It just meanly states that you don't make that particular election cycle. Then they become the first in queue to go to the next election cycle.
Okay.
It's a point of clarification.
Okay, thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? Okay, questions from Assembly members? Assemblymember Niello?
I could repeat a lot of the things that I said about the last initiative, but I won't do that. With regard to the comments of Mr. Hansen, I don't disagree with anything that you said, except that it is true democracy and that a question is put on the ballot and everybody votes on it. So that is democracy, pure in the sense and fundamentally different than the representative process we go through here in the legislature. But again, it is an attempt to restrict the initiative process, not necessarily to cure the concerns that we have about it, but to try to cure those concerns by just restricting the process. And I'd suggest that if we are going to limit the number of initiatives on the ballot, that it will exactly tend to advantage those interests that you're concerned might have a disproportionate influence now because they'd have the resources to get things done very quickly. And the other thing is, once we start putting rules on those things, anytime you create rules where they are more complicated or more numerous than they were before, what you usually do is invite charlatans to participate to figure out how to get around the rules. And I think it would invite maneuvers that would involve really just the attempt to keep things off of the ballot as opposed to trying to qualify something for the ballot. So, again, these proposals that we're hearing today, I'm acknowledging that there are legitimate concerns about the initiative process, that the legislative process is theoretically a better place to settle things, but the latter isn't working well enough to satisfy the concerns of those that can place initiatives on the ballot. And secondly, we are attempting to address the concerns that we have about the process by just putting rules and restrictions on it. And that doesn't address the concerns. It just puts rules and restrictions on it.
Any other Assembly members?
I just wanted
Assemblymember Cotto?
wanted to hear your comments about this question about if you're number 6 in line, right, or number 7 in line, and number 6 and number 7 in line is a Assemblymember Nilo good government accountability and government initiative, and it's a real good initiative that gets bumped because it wasn't one of the first 5 in line. How does one address that?
Well, it's not any different if we had absolutely no restrictions. Whoever qualifies for the ballot is still going to qualify, and that order is going to be from 1 until 10, 15, 20. They're going to take whatever first 5 qualify for that particular election. So let's say number 6 doesn't make that first round. Number 6 then goes up to number 1. So whether you're a good government, have very little resources, have a lot of resources, whenever you qualify, you're going to be put in that queue. The whole point is to have less at one point or one election cycle. It doesn't totally inhibit anybody from being able to put something forth in the election process.
Did you explore, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chair, if I could ask another question? Well, let me ask it anyway. Did you explore any other ways of limiting the process? Did you consider any other ways of doing that?
Sure. I'll let Mr. Hansen maybe address this question.
Limiting, since the number is one serious problem, right? So,
well, there was one idea that we've looked at that we thought was very interesting, and Mr. Hernandez has worked on a lot of different ideas, and he's been brainstorming with a group of us at different points. We really appreciate just having some free-thinking discussion on this. The state of Nevada, I think, has a really good really good process in place that we'd support seeing here in Nevada and California. In Nevada, you have to vote on something in 2 election cycles before it becomes part of the Constitution. So it passes in one election cycle, then it sits for 2 years, and then it comes back again. And if it passes both times, then it goes into the Constitution. That creates a thoughtful process. It gives time, to people who maybe try to run a big campaign and throw a bunch of happy windmills and kids carrying, sunflowers and all the silly things that happen at a campaign, and allows time for thoughtful consideration. If we're going to change our state's constitution that's been here for 150 years and growing, 2 years is a reasonable process. If there's an emergency or something, they have a provision to handle that. But why not have an initiative that's to run in 2 cycles? I mean, that would be thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. Assemblymember Saldana.
Well, I don't think has this bill been moved yet?
No one's moved it. We're just discussing it, and I'm assuming we may not even get a motion, which...
just in reference to some comments that were made.
Of course,
don't concede so easily. Come on, fight, Assembly member. Our state constitution has been amended over 574
times.
574. I've heard 517, 574.
Over 500 times.
Over 500. We'll agree on that number. And the U.S. Constitution, 28 amendments, I believe.
28 amendments, yes.
So clearly, California is a constitution on steroids when it comes to the number of amendments that we have. And I know we've talked about reform, and everyone seems to be wanting to do some reform now because of various pressures on the state, financial and otherwise. So I'm willing to move this bill because I think it is part of, again, a reform discussion that needs to take place. It's clearly a work in progress. But I think if we want to be fair about having discussions on how to reform, how to save money, how to protect the rights for people to participate in the process, but not overwhelm voters with so many ballots that they are simply giving up and saying no to everything, that we need to look at the process. So with that, I'll move the bill.
Okay, been moved. And seconded. Okay. Any other questions from Assembly members? Sandra Swanson?
Okay.
This is ACA 14.
Yeah. I just wanted to say I've had an opportunity to talk with the author of the bill, and I'm convinced that the author is open to examining some of the questions that will work to preserve the public's right of initiative, which is my principal concern. And so with that, I'm willing to support the bill going forward.
All right, I have a none recommendation. It's because I'm listening to the proponents of this, and you can crowd out those less funded, those who are less funded, and how are you going to prevent 5 Mr. Pickens from putting five types of initiatives on the ballot, and then those who are grassroots or organizations will be pushed out of the whole process?
Well, as I mentioned, it doesn't preclude anyone for putting once they qualify, they're going to qualify. They're going to fall into that queue whenever that occurs.
Mr. Chair, on that point, this doesn't change my concern with the bill, but I just have to point out the language is contrary to that, unless I'm misunderstanding or unless it's vague and it needs redrafting. But line 28 through 35 of page 2 just imply to the contrary. Says an initiative measure that qualifies for an election ballot pursuant to paragraph 1 of subdivision C, even if it was not placed on the ballot pursuant to paragraph 2 of that subdivision, shall not be placed on the ballot at a subsequent election. Nothing in this subdivision prohibits a new initiative measure containing the same or similar proposal from qualifying for a subsequent election ballot in the manner specified by this section. That clearly implies, I will agree it's vague, but to me, if I had to state what it implies that if it isn't one of the first 5, it doesn't become the first one the next time. It drops off entirely, and it has to be resubmitted.
Well, perhaps maybe we can do this. I understand that the chair has made a none recommendation. Because this is a constitutional amendment, I'm not subject to the same rules that a normal legislation. We can move this along. This can take its time. Why don't we just, work with the staff and make some more clarifying language, and then either bring it back at the next committee hearing or perhaps bring it back at a later date.
So you'll hold the bill, right?
We'll hold the bill at this point.
Okay. You want to withdraw your motion?
Certainly.
Withdraw?
Actually, I don't think, well, I can't speak for, but I'll withdraw the second, and then that makes the motion null and void, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And I would just say that I appreciate the author taking that position, and I explained I had a number of questions, before this bill actually got to the floor, and obviously Mr. Nilo has raised some questions that need careful examination, and so I certainly support continued work and maybe even discussion with the opposition.
Okay. All right. So this is all pulled.
We'll hold it from committee, and my staff will, as well as Mr. Hansen, and we'll work with you, and we'll follow up with you as well.
Okay.
To make it more clear, to
Thank
clarify
you
the
for
language.
working with the staff and the committee members.
And then I believe you have an initial vote. If maybe you can lift a call for AC 813, unless you have another member willing to speak in front of me, after me.
If you lift the call,
lift the call for ACA 13.
Swanson, aye.
On ACA 13,
Yeah.
Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
4-2. It's out. Okay. All right. Krikorian? Okay. Next bill is Mr. Blakesley, ACA 3. Senator Krikorian, Assemblyman Krikorian will be presenting.
Senator.
You know, I'm a senator. I'm presenting a Republican bill. Things we've gone through the looking glass, haven't we? Mr. Chair and members, it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Assemblymember Blakesley to present ACA 3 in committee today. ACA 3 seeks to address the increased burden that's placed on California's budget when initiatives create general obligation bonds. ACA 3 requires that any proposed ballot initiative that includes authorization of a general obligation bond measure in excess of $1 billion include a clearly defined funding source, either in the form of a new tax or fee or the reduction or elimination of an existing program or programs of a comparable cost. The state's current financial crisis is exacerbated by the ballot box budgeting promoted by unfunded mandates on the general fund, which are often approved by voters who have insufficient information or are misinformed about the consequences and the fiscal impacts of the initiative. The intent of this measure is to target a very specific type of initiative that creates long-lasting budgetary problems. Most bond measures approved by the voters remained on the state's ledgers for over 30 years, causing a long-term strain on the state's budget and whittling away the general fund because of debt service. ACA 3 will give voters a more informed picture of the budgetary implications of their choices made at the ballot box. On Mr. Blakesley's behalf, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Okay. Witnesses in support.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. We're in support for the reasons presented by Assemblymember Krikorian.
Thank you. Okay, any witnesses in opposition? None? Any questions from Assembly members? None? Okay, well, I commend the author for tackling the growing problem of initiative measures that impose significant costs on state government without providing a funding source. On the Senate side, Senator Cheney has a similar measure that would require all proponents of all initiative measures that have a fiscal impact to have a funding source. And I think in time you might have to look at her bill and merge or work together with her bill and see what you guys can do together. But this is a step in the right direction, and I'm recommending support of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And speaking for myself, not Mr. Blakesley, I'm a co-author of that bill as well. And so I do think that these are compatible efforts. Mr. Blakesley's effort takes a somewhat more narrow approach. Senator Cheney's is broader, but I think they're both steps in the right direction for curing the problem that we have of unfunded mandates on our general fund.
Great, thank you. Bill's been moved and seconded by Mr. Berryhill. Okay. Secretary, take roll.
Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo?
Feeling the bipartisan love. Nilo, aye.
And Nilo, aye.
Okay.
Bill Berryhill?
Aye.
Bill Berryhill, aye. Koto?
Koto, aye.
Koto, aye. Mendoza? Saldana? Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
Okay, 5-0, it's out. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And Mr. Nilo, it may be a feeling that you could kind of get accustomed to. If you really feel good about it and if you're feeling the warmth, I think that we have some things this week coming up that'll make you feel even better.
Assemblyman Krikorian, some of my best friends come from the other side of the aisle.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, members.
No, Mr. Nilo. I'm actually voting on the Higher Ed Committee.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
And I'll be back.
Well, do we have anybody here to present?
Were there other votes I missed?
It would appear that I'm the only person here to present a bill. Mac Taylor was going to be here with me to answer any questions folks had about my bill. In the interest of moving the schedule along, I'll go ahead and present. It's going to be difficult for me to preside over the meeting and present the bill at the same time, so I'll pass this on to Mr. Berryhill, since he's closest to me.
Thank you. I got you. Were there other?
Been here, done that. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Nilo. Item 6.
And members. Boy, that was quick, Mr. Chair. I know. He just wanted to see this presentation so that he could probably give me a little bit of grief. I am here to present ACA 20, which is really a very simple bill. Now, that phrase is usually preceding a presentation of a highly controversial and/or highly complex bill. The bill is not complex. It is somewhat controversial because this is the third time I've presented a similar idea, and I have yet to pass out of committee. But you know the old adage, the third time is the charm, and I'm counting on the fact that it will. ACA 20 just simply changes the current constitutional requirement that the Attorney General write the title and summary of initiative measures, and that the impartial legislative analyst write those title and summary statements instead. Under existing law, the Attorney General is tasked with giving a true and impartial statement of the purpose of a measure. The true and impartial statement. The challenge is that the Attorney General is a partisan position. And I think it's unrealistic to believe that he is going to be impartial on issues dealt with by initiatives. The legislative analyst has proven as an institution to be impartial and very much consistently impartial. The ledge analyst is really very well suited to provide this summary, since the purpose of the summary is to, I'm quoting from the Constitution again, identify the chief purpose and points of the proposed measure, not offer an analysis of primary legal changes to existing law. One of the senses that people have is that the Attorney General has to do it because it requires a legal expertise. It does not. The Constitution does not indicate that the title and summary needs to be of a legal nature. Now, there are many examples of verification of the concern with regard to Attorney General drafting of title and summary issues. And there is one just recently that's particularly striking. Senator Runner is bringing forth a voter ID initiative, which he is just in the process of qualifying, or I think it has qualified. A substantially similar, virtually identical initiative was on the ballot a few years ago, 2005, I believe. Bill Lockyer was the Attorney General. The title and summary in 2005 said, voter identification requirement. Initiative statute requires that voters present one of 4 types of picture identification before voting. Attorney General Brown, this time, has drafted a title and summary for virtually the identical initiative, and it says, limits on voting, initiative statute prohibits citizens from voting at the polls unless they present a government-issued photo identification card. Now, I know many people have strong opinions about this particular proposal, and there are some that would probably say that Attorney General Brown's title and summary is objective and is an impartial statement of what that initiative does. But if you do believe that, you have to believe that Mr. Lockyer did exactly the opposite. Either one proves the point. Another initiative recently was the high-speed rail initiative, which the legislature actually changed, and this title and summary, I believe, was drafted by the Attorney General, but it at least in any case states how a title and summary can kind of skew things. Agree or disagree with the project of high-speed rail. The initiative that was on the November 2008 ballot stated that Proposition 1A provided long-distance commuters with a safe, convenient, affordable, and reliable alternative to driving at high gas prices, reduces traffic congestion, reduces California's dependence on foreign oil, reduces air pollution and global warming gases. To read that title and summary, one would be convinced that the $10 billion on that initiative was going to buy the entire high-speed rail system, which of course it wasn't. Now, when you read the point that I'm really making here, isn't so much the title and summary language itself, as egregiously misstated as it was. When you got into the legislative analysts, and Mr. Taylor is here with me now, when you got into the legislative analysts' analysis of that, within 2 sentences, you knew that this was a partial performance of the job, but the title and summary didn't. The legislative analysts provided the impartial impact on that. The only other one that I'll throw out is Proposition 93, the term limits proposition, that stated that the title and summary said it reduced legislative terms. A clear attempt to solicit support for the proposition by stating that changing the limits from 6 years in the Assembly and 8 years in the Senate, which is a total of 14, down to a cumulative of 12, is a reduction in term limits, I think we can all agree that was not a completely accurate statement, and I believe it was clearly made to sell the initiative. The analysts' analysis of that was completely objective and pointed out that it can be an increase for some and a decrease for others, clearly. So I just believe that this is a good sense measure. I realize in the past there's not been support from the majority party on the issue, but I continue to try because, in my opinion, the proposal is compelling. I ask for your aye vote. Mac Taylor is here to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Questions from Assembly members? Mr. Berryhill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I commend the author on this bill. It's a good bill. It's a simple bill. I think even though you haven't had support from the other side of the aisle in the past, I would hope that we could get support on this bill today. There'll be a day when we have one of our people in the Attorney General's office, and it works both ways. And the LAO's office has always been shown to be, their integrity when it comes to these things is fantastic, and I would hope to see the other side give us some support on this one. It's a good bill. Thanks.
Could I imply by that, Mr. Berryhill, that you might have been making a motion?
Yes, move the bill.
I will second it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Okay, there was a similar bill that was presented, and we defeated it earlier this year. And my position hasn't changed since that time. So it makes sense to have the Attorney General, the Chief Lawyer of the state, to prepare the title and summary. And it's a philosophical difference, I think, that we're having here. Because
I absolutely agree with that, Mr. Fall.
Yeah. Yes, Andres Swanson.
And let me say, in all due respect to the author, who I respect a great deal, I believe that the citizens have to have the ability to hold us accountable. And I think the AG, whether it's the AG or the governor, I think citizens should be able to make a judgment of whether or not they're being fair in their analysis. and they are upholding their oath. And so I think that we may disagree with the analysis, but citizens elect the AG and the Attorney General, and they can hold the Attorney General accountable. I mean, we can make our arguments to the citizens that the Attorney General's work in this regard is subpar. So that's why I believe that it should stay with the Attorney General, and that citizens, if they have a problem, they should always have the ability to address that through the ballot box. And if you take it away from the Attorney General, and it's not the question of whether or not legislative analyst's office is fair, and that's really not a question. I don't think anybody can dispute whether or not they would offer a fair analysis, but they're not accountable to the voters. The AG is. So.
Okay, with that, closing statement.
2 points in terms of the comments that have been made. Mr. Fong, you say that we have philosophic differences, and certainly we do on a lot of issues. Now, if the philosophic difference derives from the notion, similar to what Mr. Swanson said, that elected officials should be accountable and this is the proper place for it, then fine. I don't agree with that, and I'll get to that point in a moment. But if the philosophic difference is because you like the way the AG develops the statements, particularly those that I cited, then I challenge that notion of philosophic differences. I'll grant that there are philosophic differences, but my concern is that if the philosophic difference is because your philosophy runs closer to the AG in the crafting of the statements, then that kind of makes my case. I don't mean to impugn your statement, but I just want to make it clear that merely philosophic differences do not necessarily justify opposition of the bill for purposes of what the initiative process seeks in the Constitution to provide. And that begins to get at the point that you made, Mr. Swanson. There is nothing in the initiative process that involves any notion of the accountability of elected officials to the voters. Indeed, it really operates to counter that. It is a mechanism for the voters, as I said earlier, to exercise their right of direct democracy granted by the Constitution, by the initiative process, to counteract that which their elected officials either did or didn't do. So there just is no notion, there's no room within the rubric of the initiative process to inject elected official accountability into that process. If that is true, then the ledge analysts ought not to be doing the analyses either. So I just, all due respect, have to reject the logic of your argument because it's just not supported by the intent of the initiative process in the first place, and certainly not by the language of the Constitution, other than the fact that it specifies the Attorney General. I ask for an aye vote.
Okay, thank you. All right, Secretary, call roll.
Fong?
Was it moved?
It's been moved and seconded, yeah. No.
Fong, no. Nilo?
Aye.
Nilo, aye. Bill Berryhill?
Aye.
Bill Berryhill, aye.
I'm ahead.
Koto? Koto, no. Mendoza?
You're tied now.
Saldana? Swanson?
Swanson, no.
Swanson, no. It's on call.
It's on call. Thank you.
And I would say for the record, I mean, the Legislative Analyst's Office probably could do a good job in running the state, too. Yeah, I just said the Legislative Analyst's Office probably could do a good job of running the state, too.
Yes.
Let's give them control for about 6 months and see what happens.
Senator Yee, AB 288.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, it's always good to come to this committee and see good friends and former colleagues. My superintendent is here, and it's my pleasure to be here. He's an assembly member, and I'm a senator now, Mr. Cotto. Anyway. No, you will always have the last word. Members, this is a rather important issue as the Asian population continues to grow in the state of California, and as more and more Asians are voting and running for office and so on, the Asian vote becomes a rather critical vote in any election. So what this bill will do is to prevent fraud and deception in our voting process. This bill basically establishes the fact that in those counties where you have bilingual ballots, that there's now a procedure that we will establish to have individuals who have Korean, Japanese, or Chinese names that they would.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to me to move the bill.
Moved and seconded.
And so it sets up a procedure for the either phonetic or transliterations of names. It also provides an appeal process if the decision that is made by the registrar's office is not in agreement. And so it provides at least a standardized procedure, an appeal process as to how these names are established. What you don't want to do is to have an individual going in and trying to court the Asian vote by coming up with a name that may somehow attract votes rather than really telling the true identity of that particular candidate. And so with that, urge an aye vote.
Okay. Witnesses in support?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Casey Kaneko of Suter & Associates, representing the City and County of San Francisco in support. We believe that this measure will not only prevent fraud, but it will provide some statewide procedures, which we think would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any witnesses in opposition? Any questions from assembly members?
Just, Mr. Chair, I commend the author on the bill.
Thank you very much. And Alameda County is already doing this, and you're leading the way along with San Francisco and Santa Clara County.
I also commend you on this bill. It's
Thank
great
you very
to
much.
prevent fraud. Okay. Moved and seconded?
It's been moved and seconded.
Okay. We'll close.
Urge an aye vote.
Okay.
Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Nilo?
Aye.
Nilo, aye. Bill Berryhill?
Aye.
Bill Berryhill, aye. Koto?
Cotto, aye.
Koto, aye. Mendoza? Saldana? Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye.
5-0 is out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leland. Lift the call on.
ACA 2.
The only way I would vote for this bill is if when they use the phonetic symbol, when my name is on the ballot, they'll say.
Okay, lift the file item on ACA 2.
Koto?
ACA 2, Furtani.
Aye.
Koto, aye. Mendoza?
4-2, the bill is out. We have one more.
And
We all vote?
We have one more. And I have to go.
We all have to go.
One more bill, thank you.
Do we have an offer?
No offer.
Okay. Well, let's just sit around here and look at each other.
I'm okay.
I want to make that motion. I told you.
There's no more. I'm okay on the other votes.
If I voted for all of those.
I vote on everything.
Wait, no.
I'm sure sergeants are trying.
Okay.
Let me make sure that we had it here for consent.
Sure, I voted for all of them.
Consent?
Consent is aye.
Thought so.
Yeah,
So I'm done, right?
Yes, I
We
have
got
to.
except for this one.
Except for
Except for the
Corbin.
last one. Yeah, what about me?
Double check. I know I have it here.
The others were on
I
consent.
have you on everything.
The others are on consent, right?
I have you on consent, and yeah, and then we just have one on call and one to come up.
You got work to do, man. You, hey. You got work to do. All right? Yeah, yeah.
The first item was for Tawny ACA 2, that passed.
Somebody yes on that.
Item 2 also was passed.
Yeah, high on that too.
Item 3 was pulled. Item 4, Hernandez is due pass as amended.
That's ACA 14?
13.
Oh, 13. Oh, yes. I'm a yes on that one.
On ACA 14, we decided to hold it in committee. We didn't vote.
Okay.
ACA 20 is on call. ACA 21 was pulled.
Obviously,
We have not voted on
she or someone
Corbett.
doesn't show up soon.
Mr. Yee's bill, it was passed.
I'm an aye on that.
You've contacted
Hancock, SB 387.
She what?
Yeah, I'm an aye.
Yeah.
She is en route now, according to her staff.
Items 11 and 12 were sent.
So I'm aye on that too.
Okay.
So we're waiting for
We're waiting for Ms. Corbett, and then we have one item on call.
one on call. Which one's number one on call?
Item 6, Mr. Nilo.
I have different, I don't know why, but okay.
Yeah,
The other number.
Mr. Nilo's has, it's one we have come up before as a bill that had to do with changing the
It's on call?
ACA 20.
Yeah, I was
Mr.
just on call.
Nilo.
So you have to wait till it comes back up for a vote?
Right.
Okay.
Vote yes, Tony. Just vote yes.
Lift the call.
Vote yes.
On file item 6.
On file item 6, ACA 20.
Mendoza?
Oh,
Mendoza, no. Saldana? That,
2 to 4, the measure fails.
Without objection, we'll grant reconsideration by unanimous consent.
Without objection, we'll grant reconsideration by unanimous consent.
Thank you very much.
Well,
I love talking about it.
you're very good at it, too.
We have another hearing. We can urge in 2 weeks.
Okay. Is she coming? Okay. Okay. This meeting is adjourned.